I read The Killer Angels in '78, and every movie I worked on between '78 and the summer of '92, when we finally filmed it, the poor actors and crew had to hear me talking about the Battle of Gettysburg every lunchtime, every dinner time, on every set of every movie I was working on. And a producer friend of mine told me over the 12 years it took between when I read the book and when we were filming, he said, "Ron, when 10 people tell you you're drunk, lie down." Because every studio had turned it down, not once but twice. But that's Hollywood. My story is actually typical. Movies like Gettysburg don't just get made on the assembly line. Behind every movie like Gettysburg, there's a filmmaker or a collection of filmmakers who willed it into being. The movies that we cherish, the movies that we love, there's a filmmaker behind it. It's not just a factory. After I optioned the book in '78, my initial conversations with Michael Shara were on the phone. I was living in New York City at the time. Michael was in Florida, and we finally met. Now, when I optioned the book, I had never seen this battlefield. When I was a youth, growing up in New Jersey, my father, who was a big-time history buff and a World War II veteran, took my younger brother and I, our little family would go up to the sites up on the Hudson River and Lake Champlain, the sites of the French and Indian War, Fort Ticonderoga, Fort William Henry, Battle of Saratoga and the American Revolution. So these are the things that I influenced my youth, but I hadn't seen a single Civil War battlefield, although I was reading about them, until I decided to meet Michael Shara here. And so our first meeting was that summer in '78 after I had optioned the book. Michael flew up with his Piper Cub. He had his pilot license. He flew in and he landed at the grass strip here in Gettysburg. I drove down from New York. And for the next 3 days, my first visit to any Civil War battlefield, Michael Shara was my guide. We spent the first day walking through the sites of what in his novel he wrote about in the first day. We spent the entire second day walking through what in his novel is the second day. And we spent the third day walking through what in his novel is the third day. Now, of course, everyone in this room, everyone watching understands that Michael Shara's book is just his vision of the battle. The battle was much broader, happened in many more places, involved many more military confrontations. But Michael Shara, in his view, distilled it down to this handful of characters and these handful of particular battles. I have the fondest memories of that time. He was a great writer, and it started a wonderful friendship that lasted until the day he died in 1988. Michael didn't live to see this movie. The movie came out, as we know, in '93. He was not even alive when we filmed it in '92. When he died, he didn't know it would ever be made. So I'm thinking of Michael today, the work that he started, and we know writers work in their lonely rooms, slaving away in obscurity. And even though the book won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction when it came out in '75, it was never a bestseller until after the movie was aired in the summer of 1992. So with that anecdote, I'll pass the microphone over to my dear friend, wonderful actor, Stephen Lang.
Compliments to Andrew and the staff here. This is my second time at this museum. It's really quite lovely. I think when I first heard about it, my initial inclination was we need another museum in Gettysburg, and we really do. It's a unique museum and it's beautifully curated, so congratulations to that. Long life to it, I'd say. I read Killer Angels in probably '76, I would say, and the minute I read it, I responded the way we all respond to this book, and but I had it in my mind to play Pickett. I said I have to be George Pickett, That's 76, and then 92, it happens. We were working, I'll tell it very, very right. The other actors here, I think you'll meet everybody, I hope. Everything. I was doing a play, and I was doing Hamlet in New York, and my good pal, Billy Campbell, who's sitting down at the end there, was playing Laertes, and he came to me before it was a matinee and said, got to be real good today, got to be good today, because there's this guy, Ron Maxwell, who's coming, and he's directing the movie of Killer Angels, and I'm up for the role of Joshua Chamberlain. And I'm like, they're doing Killer Angels? They're doing Killer Angels? And, why don't I know about this? Oh, anyway, but I was playing Hamlet, so I was able to kind of put it out of my mind, because, you kind of have to concentrate on Hamlet when you're doing it, and we were doing two that day, Hamlet twice is really, it's a long day. And, but after the show, I was walking through the lobby, and a fella come up to me and put out his hand and say, "Hi, I'm Ron Maxwell." And when he did that, just as it happened, it all came flooding back to me what Billy had said to me. And I put out my hand and I said, "Hello, I'm George Pickett." And that's what happened. And he kind of goes like, "Do you want to have breakfast tomorrow?" And I'm like, yeah. And we met at the Mayflower Hotel. It's right, it's true, right? And then we had, and by the time I left there, I was George Pickett. And it's I don't even know if you can completely appreciate this unless you are an actor, to actually get a role that you've dreamed of playing for so many years is it doesn't happen all that often, so I just was so fortunate. Now, of course, the really kind of sad postscript to the story is, of course, that Billy did not get the role of Joshua Chamberlain. That went in. that went instead to Jeff Daniels, who did a yeoman-like job. He was fabulous in it, but there is no doubt in my mind that BC would have been brilliant in the role. And then just to finish it off, Billy ends up playing a role, Pitzer, which is that's a Yiddish word for really small part, really tiny role. But of course he was great and Billy also, you understand, he brought his musket, so if he wasn't playing Pitzer, he'd be out there reenacting with the troops. He's in the movie all the time because he loves this stuff. Anyway, but the great thing about it is, as the aficionados will know, there is one laugh in the entire film of Gettysburg. It's an earned laugh, a beautifully earned laugh, and Pitzer gets it. Campbell gets it. He gets the laugh in the movie. So it all worked out. And then subsequently his career worked out pretty great in any case, So there you are. Anyway, that's just a little bit of something that I remember from it. There's a lot to talk about, but I'll leave it. I introduce now the general, Tom Berenger.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Steve. George. God, where do I begin here? I don't know how many trips back I've made, and it's kind of weird and ominous, but I kind of think this might be the last one. The first time I came, I was 7 years old, and I remember playing in Devil's Den. My dad had decided that he was going to show my sister and I the country by car, and we would take trips from the south side of Chicago each year, every summer, during his vacation. And the first one, I can't remember if it was New England, and we went to Lexington and Concord, and Paul Revere's house, et cetera, and the Old North Church. Or if it was kind of the middle states. I'm not quite sure, but anyway, in one of these trips, and we must have done 5 in 5 years, and we had a map in the kitchen and a grease pencil line here, and then there, then to the southeast, then to the west, and to the southwest over a 5-year period. So both my sister and I learned how to read maps. We both got into history, and Gettysburg Civil War was one of them. When I met Ron, the first time was I was supposed to go to the Deauville Film Festival in France with Eddie and the Cruisers, and the French consulate in Manhattan had a little party at a French restaurant for those of us that were going, and that was the first time I met Ron. I don't know if you remember that or not, but yep, yeah. And we actually met there, and then the second time was I was shooting Someone to Watch Over Me, and we were in Queens, New York, not too far from my old neighborhood where I lived and started out in the theater. And we were night shooting, and they said, oh, there's a reporter from the Daily News wants to do an interview with you. I go, oh my God, I'm in every scene. It's like we're shooting all night. You know, I work every day, come on. And they said, well, it would just be that 20 questions thing. You've seen that column? I go, oh yeah. Well, we can handle that. We can do that at lunchtime. And that went fine. And then one of the questions was, best book read this year? Well, I said, The Killer Angels by Michael Shar won the Pulitzer Prize in 1975, I think, for historical fiction. I said, awesome. Next day, production calls me again. They said, there's a guy that wants to meet you. He's like, something about the Killer Angels, and his name is Ron Maxwell. Here's his number. So I got a hold of him, and he told me that he was working on the script with Michael Shara, et cetera, and could we meet for lunch? I said, well, I'm off on Sunday. So we met at some nondescript little bar on the west side, and we just started talking about it, and we were both very excited. Time goes on, maybe a year or two. I'm doing a play in Connecticut, in New Haven, a really good play, 3-character play. And anyway, I'm at the end of the week, this one particular week of the run, and for some reason I'm just really tired. You know, I guess we've done a matinee and it's Saturday night, and then we've done a night show. And I'm the last one in the dressing room. I just get dressed, I walk out, and there's some guy sitting, you know, in the dark there, because the lights have gone out in that sort of lobby area, and he's sitting there in a little row of chairs, and I think a custodian cleaning up who's going to lock up behind me. And I walk and I see it, and I said, Ron? He goes, hey Tom, great performance, love the play. I go, oh, it's great, isn't it? Yeah. And I said, how you doing? Sit down, and he tells me where he's at on it. He said, blah, 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 so on and so forth. This is what I've done. This is where I'm going. And I said, well, you know, God bless you. Keep at it. I said, because we need to do this. This is our history. And I have to say, it really has been an honor for me to do that. It really, yeah, it means a lot. Anyway, then I'm in California. This is the third time. I don't know, maybe this is a year or two later. I'm not sure. But I'm in California, and I get a call from my agent. He says, there's a guy named Ron Maxwell. I go, yeah. And he says, well, it looks like he's got Gettysburg going, and Ted Turner's going to do it. I said, no shit, really? Oh, this is great. He says, well, he wants to meet me. I go, yes. He says, well, he'll come to your hotel. He's here in California. And I said, okay. So we met at my hotel, and then we just went through the whole thing, the whole gamut of how he was going to shoot it. And I said, well, what about Pickett's charge? For God's sakes, you have to have thousands of infantry for that. And he said, I have spent the last 3-4 years just going around to all the Civil War roundtables, rounding them up. They are jacked beyond belief. I said, oh yeah, they would be. All the reenactors, they're all going to show up in Gettysburg. Oh my God, how are they going to handle it? He says, well, we're going to have a camp for them. They bring all their own tents, you know, and their cooking gear and stuff, and they did. They had a whole campsite that General Pickett and I ran out to, you know, shake hands and talk to the boys. But, and they had provided a whole row of phone banks, because this was before cell phones, so they could call home, you know, while they were there for the shoot. And, I mean, this was some hellish organization, because when they finally got to Pickett's charge is when they had to have the most infantry in the open. And that's when the most guys were there. But I mean, this was so exciting because I was suddenly 7 years old again in Devil's Den. And I remember my assistant, Stevie, and I, rest in peace, bless his heart, he was as jacked as I was about this whole thing, and he was up there through the whole shoot and in the movie. But it was like, we remember seeing the cannons coming rolling down Baltimore Street as they kept coming into town, coming into town. And to actually have been there during that shoot, and several of my friends that were there, Ned Tupper and his wife, you know, they, and then from South Carolina, and Jim French and his wife from Virginia all came up to visit. That was 30 years ago. And Jim and Ned were like little boys on the battlefield. I set up some ladders at the grips, and electricians, you know, said, we gave you the 12-foot ladders. Said, you guys just get up there, take your cameras and your video cameras then, and just fire away. They were running around like kids. And speaking of that, and they're here. And speaking of that, I had a meeting with Ted Turner before we started shooting because he had a little island right off the coast of Beaufort County, South Carolina, where I lived. And I knew a brother-in-law of a friend of mine says, yeah, well, my brother-in-law is the guy that runs the boat back and forth, brings supplies, groceries, etc., to the island and kind of watches it when they're not there. And I said, oh man, I'd love to meet him. Somehow, I end up getting a dinner. So I bring my wife at the time, Lisa, and she and I head over there on the boat to meet with Ted and Jane Fonda. Jane I already knew because I'd met her at a party and then a couple other times after that in California. So we go there, and Ted was like a kid. You know, he's this kind of guy that is like Franklin Roosevelt, a little boy in a man's body, and was just leaping out of his skin with excitement about doing the movie. And while we're sitting there having dinner, he and my ex-wife Lisa were sitting on one side of the table, and I'm on this side of the table, and Jane Fonda's next to me, and he says, you know, Berenger, I always wanted to die in Pickett's charge. I said, excuse me? He said, I always wanted to die in Pickett's charge when I was a young boy, and even now I wouldn't mind it. And I said, well, why don't you, Ted? Say what? Well, why don't we put you in a colonel's uniform, leading a Georgia regiment up to the up there to that old, you know, French rail post. What is it? Emmitsburg Road. And you lead there, and we give you one line, and you going over the fence, you go, come on, boys, give them the cold steel, and as you crossing the fence, you get shot and die. Whoa, really? I go, yeah, why not? In the meantime, through all this, Jane is kicking me under the table. And I keep on with it, and he keeps getting more and more excited, and she keeps kicking me under the table. And he says, well, can we do this? I said, yeah, why not? You're the executive producer. Come on. And he says, yeah, but, you know, could we knock this off in about an hour? I go, whoa, wait a minute now. Filmmaking, right, Jane? Not that easy. I said, no, I would, you know what I'd do? I'd come up the day before, get a hotel room that night, and also get fitted for your uniform, of course. I said, you know, your pistol and your sword and all that and whatnot, and, you know, just get situated. The next day we'll go out and shoot it. I said, it'd probably take a day. It's pretty involved, you know, special effects and, you know, lots of guys, and it's in the open, and, you know, it's quick. And not quick, but it's, you know, has to be done right. And he says, I said, just, you know, maybe 5 days growth, you know, just so it looks like you've marched up from Virginia and never had time to shave. And I said, you'd be great. Otherwise, you're in great shape. You look like one of them. He said, wow, that would just be great. I go, So we ended up doing it. Ron, do you want to comment on that?
To continue the story, the word got to me that Ted Turner wanted to be in Pickett's Charge. So we consulted our historical consultants and said, let's find a Confederate colonel who was shot during Pickett's Charge. And within 24 hours, they got back to me and they said, well, Colonel Patton, the great-great-uncle of General Patton of World War II, was killed at the Emmitsburg Road on July 3rd, 1863. Perfect. We did the research, we found the uniform, the right insignia, the right regimental, everything authentic for Colonel Patton. And we let Ted know they would be playing this character, and they had, of course, fitted, as Tom said, fitted for the uniform. We had scheduled 6 days for Pickett's Charge. It's because, like any summer in Gettysburg, we don't know what the weather's going to be like. So we had a total of what we call in our business 5 days of rain cover. If it rains for 5 days, we can do an interior scene. As you all know, very few interior scenes in this movie. It take place inside of tents, essentially. Everything else is outside, day or night. And there's, of course, Lee's headquarters and Meade's headquarters. But that was it for the interiors. So if it rained more than 5 days, we were going to lose time. And on the schedule we were on and on the budget we were on, we couldn't afford to do that. So we had to be very judicious about how we planned things. So Pickett's Charge was so immense, and as Tom said, or as Stephen said, we had 5,500 reenactors for that week. Before and after, we had thousands of reenactors, but that particular week, we knew in advance we wanted the big effect. It's before CGI, or it was the very early days of digital effects. Anyway, we didn't use any digital effects in Gettysburg at all. So every time you see soldiers, it's real people. So we had allotted 6 days for Pickett's Charge because we thought if it rains 3 days of the 6, we needed 3 days in terms of our storyboard to tell the story, to have enough of the basic shots. So the way we organized the week was the first 3 days of whatever, first 3 days, dry days, we could, even if it only rained 3 days, we'd have enough for a sequence. Well, as it turned out, it didn't rain any of those days. So as you all know, we have a movie within a movie called Pickett's Charge. We were able to get every shot we wanted in that sequence. Some critics, laughingly said that we filmed Pickett's Charge in real time, which is almost true, not quite. So the day came up for when we were going to do Ted's scene. So the night before, we had dinner at one of the local eateries here, and we had some of the cast with Ted, and I said, now Ted, we can shoot the scene one of 2 ways tomorrow. And I'm always thinking in terms of the budget and time. Any filmmaker thinks that way all the time. I said, we can put the camera low and shoot you against the sky with like 100 reenactors around you and some explosions, or we can lift the camera up and you see 2,000 guys behind you, but that's a bigger deal, more explosions, more smoke. And Ted said, I want to do it the big way. No problem. That gives me total license to take whatever time I need to do it. But I'm still thinking I have to get through the day's work. This is just one shot in the middle of 50 setups. And we have Case Van Ostrom is here, our cinematographer. Every time you have another setup, it's a lot of work for the whole crew. And especially this scene, because when you say action, 1,500 or 2,000 guys are moving, explosions are behind you, smoke, special effects, it's a big deal. So when you say cut, you got to reposition. That's another 30, 45 minutes before you can say action again. Well, Ted was fitted with the squibs, which are what explodes on the chest when you get shot. And he was going to say, let's go, boys. We rehearsed it a few times. We always rehearse. You never just shoot. You rehearse because you don't have to have all the firing going on. And remember, we had real weapons on the set. For those who remember that, they were real muskets, real pistols, real bayonets, real cannons. Somebody could get hurt, somebody could get killed if you weren't very careful. And every morning I had a meeting with all the ADs and all the department heads, and I said, here's the first three things we're going to think about. Safety, safety, and safety. We're not going to lose a person. We're not going to lose an animal. We're not going to lose a horse. And thank God we had the most magnificent crew who abided that. And I said, we can't go too fast. You start to rush, somebody is going to get hurt. And we said, let's pace ourselves and not get ahead of ourselves. And on a day like that day with Ted Turner, it was a hazardous set. So every time we'd say cut, the ADs would collect everybody who had a musket in that scene. They'd put the muskets up in the air and fire them to make sure that every musket had been fired. And sure enough, there were 2 or 3 muskets that hadn't been fired. And even though they're blanks, as you all know, if you get in front of a weapon that fires a blank, you could kill somebody or you could blind somebody. So this was the conditions we were under all the time. So we set up finally to do the first shot with Ted. After rehearsing it, action, all hell breaks loose. You've all seen the movie many times. All hell breaks loose. Smoke grenades, things exploding in the background, dirt, and there's always stuntmen. The stuntmen were nearest the camera. The stuntmen are doing the really dangerous stuff, falling, getting shot, falling over. And then Ted runs up right before the lens. He says, "Let's go, boys," just like Tom described back when they were having their dinner. He gets shot, but there's a slight delay between when the squibs go off and he hits his hand, and I go, oh, no. Cut. And he's looking at me like, how'd I do? Well, Ted. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy just wrote a check for $15.5 million to make the movie that I've been trying the previous 12 years to make. I said, really good. I mean, all the actors can attest that. Even if we do 1 take, 5 takes, or 10 takes, I always say really good, and then I tell them the truth. So, and then I said, Ted, the second you feel that, the second you your hands got to go there. He understood. We got to go again. So everybody goes back, the whole thing. The troops move back. We recharge the explosives. Half an hour later, we're ready to go again. And I have this in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is going to take the whole day now. This is going to be one of those $100,000 days. We just stepped in the big doo-doo. And action goes over. Let's go, boys. Script hit, and he falls down. And I'm thinking, we got it. We got it. So he's looking at me, and I said, Ted, we nailed it. And he goes, just call me 2-take Ted. And with that, Stephen, come on for another more anecdote. Oh, let me, Stephen reminds me that there were not just 2 actors in this film. Yeah, you'll never live it down, Stephen. Yeah. But we have with us, besides Tom and Stephen, Bo Brinkman, who played, and as I announce you, why don't you stand one by one, who played Walter Taylor, Bo. Billy Campbell, who could have played Chamberlain, who actually played Lieutenant Pitzer, and he did get the great, we knew the movie was working when we first previewed the movie, especially if you're doing a comedy. This obviously was not in that category, but when you're doing a comedy and the audience isn't laughing in the first 5 minutes, you have a problem in previews. But by the time we got to this scene, which is after the intermission, we knew the movie was working in previews. But when Pitzer has this line, after Chamberlain says, "Where are we posted?" he says, "Oh, the safest part of the battlefield, right smack dab in the middle." I mean, the entire house explodes in laughter. And that happened at every single screening in all our previews. And then, as you all know, but in case anyone doesn't, we continued to work together because Billy was also, ironically, played Pickett because you were busy doing the Stewart. Okay, we're doing hello, help me out. Jackson, thank you. And so we moved people around, and then Billy did Pickett in Gods and Generals. And then we did a third movie together, which you can all see on Sunday at 1 o'clock, Copperhead, where really we say in our craft, where Billy carries the picture. And wow, does he carry it. Thank you, Billy. And we also have Maxwell Caulfield, who played Colonel Strong, Vincent. And he's here with his wife, Juliet. And as an anecdote, for those who may not know it, I also directed your sister-in-law, Haley Mills, in Parent Trap 2. And what a pleasure that was. What a marvelous person, Haley Mills.
I think it's probably why I ended up in your movie.
And we have, is Patrick Falsey here? Patrick Falsey played General A.P. Hill. Is Joseph Fuqua here? He will be here over the weekend, I think, who played Jeb Stewart. And Patrick Gorman is here, I believe. Yep. Major General John Bell Hood. And then our teacup carrying Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Fremantle James Lancaster. And Major General Winfield Scott Hancock Brian Mallon, who came in all the way. Brian flew in late last night from Dublin, Ireland, to be with us. John Rothman is here, who played General John F. Reynolds. And those of you who are art aficionados know that the death of Reynolds, we reconstructed the death of Wolfe on the Plains of Abraham meticulously. We have a few of those portraits we did during the filming of Gettysburg. Is James Patrick Stewart here?
Not till later today.
He arrives later today, who played Colonel Porter Alexander. Did I miss anyone? Okay, well, Dale is here. Dale, who's our yeah, right there, right in front of me, one of our historians, on the set historians. So what I like to say, understand this, everyone. If the Army was supposed to go left instead of right and they went the wrong way, it's Dale's fault. But I think we can safely say that you mostly got things right. Thank you so much, Dale.
My other right.
Yeah. And Case Van Ostrom, who came all the way in from Shanghai, China, to be with us today. Case and I have done 3 movies together. I wouldn't think of doing a movie without having Case next to me at the camera. A great artist. I didn't forget anybody else, did I? You get everybody? Okay, I think we're back to you, Stephen.
We can do questions, Ron.
Oh, with questions? Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Thank God somebody knows what we're supposed to be doing here. So questions, please raise your hand and I'll point you out. And yes, right there in the back.
While I was pulling together some 30-year-old video of the behind-the-scenes footage, I was reminded that this film was shot under the title The Killer Angels, and a year later it was Gettysburg. Why the change? Why did you decide?
I got a call one day from Ted. Now, marvelous thing about Ted Turner, one of the many marvelous things about him, and I think it accounts for his success across all endeavors, whether it's baseball teams or CNN or wildlife preservation, sailing, the list goes on and on. He is very enthusiastic, as was stated earlier, almost a childlike enthusiasm. And then he has a great talent in selecting people. Then he selects the person to run the baseball team or to run the sailing thing, and then he leaves them alone. He just empowers that person, now, as he did with me. I didn't have final cut on the movie contractually, but in effect I did. I can say without any reservation, I made the movie I wanted to make, with nobody pushing me around. Ted has a lot of ideas. and a lot of opinions, and he's not shy in sharing them. But he'd always say, same thing on Gods and Generals, but Ron, it's your movie. He respects that a movie has to be finally filtered through the vision of a single person. There's other exceptions like the Coen brothers, but that's rare. It's usually one intellect that is the final arbiter. He understood that intuitively and totally supportive. Now, sometimes there was a decision that involved more money, where I just couldn't do something on my own. Like, for instance, on Gods and Generals, we had winter and summer and fall. So we realized that to get that, we needed a 2.5, 3 week hiatus. Well, you do a 2.5, 3 week hiatus, you're spending $1 million for people to go home. So I had to ask for that. He heard the argument and he greenlit it. That's what you call a budget overage. He greenlit it because he understood the importance of the winter Fredericksburg scene looking like the winter. Well, we were in post-production of Gettysburg, which is the editing phase, and I got a call one day from Ted, and Ted said, I think I want to call this movie Gettysburg. I didn't think that was a good idea. I said, Ted, this is based on a book that won the Pulitzer Prize. This has a literary pedigree. It's as if you wanted to say All Quiet on the Western Front, which recently was made into a movie again, brilliantly to my mind. You changed the title of All Quiet on the Western Front to World War I. I said, this has got a literary pedigree. We can't do that. So I said, well, I understand, Ron, your argument. I really do. But we're going to call it Gettysburg. And you know what? He was right. He was absolutely right. Now, who knows what the life of the film would have been called had it continued to be called Killer Angels. But one thing we know for sure, if anybody in the world today, and I see the quarterly reports from Warner Brothers of this movie, I know where it's playing, in Poland, in Japan, in Chile, in Argentina, in Canada, all over the world, millions are seeing this movie because of streaming. And I think a lot fewer people would be seeing it if it was called Killer Angels. So once again, Ted was right.
Question for Tom. I've read before that you said that you watched this movie more over the years, or this is a favorite movie of yours in retrospect for the last 30 years. I just wondered how much of the role and the backstory of Longstreet, between Longstreet and Lee, the historical impact of the decisions made on the second and third day, you carried around with you and thought about over the last 30 years.
Well, I think what you're referring to there was Longstreet constantly bringing up with General Lee, why don't we move the army to the right, And his proposal was that they would pull out of action and away from the field of battle at Gettysburg, where they would have better terrain, because the Yankees already had the high ground. And he suggested they move into Maryland to a place called Pipe Creek, and he showed him that on the map. And we don't see that in the movie, but he keeps going around the right. We repeat that many times, and I have an argument with General Hood, where he goes, why, Britt Taylor, well, I have talked to the general 3 or 4 times about that, and he does not want to, so get your men up and ready to go into action. Well, I do this, I protest, that's fine, General, go. Which is what you do in the military, and you have to. It's not a democratic voting process. And but his thought was that they could then have the high ground and also be between the Army of the Potomac and Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C., which would drive them crazy. It'd be like if you get between a hippopotamus and the river on your boat or something like that and their baby, they will destroy you. You've separated them from their baby. And it's like, no, they were always between the Rebs and Washington. That was most important. So, and that was my proposal. And we'd also have better high ground, as I said, like we did at Fredericksburg. Like they had at Fredericksburg, the Yankees. So, no, we did, I'm sorry, yeah, we had the high ground. And you know, and the Confederate Army almost had to fight defensively because they were always outnumbered. And the only time they weren't outnumbered, and Lee would have known this, was at Gettysburg. It's the only time they weren't outnumbered, and the armies were about equal, almost to a man. And part of that was because they had huge enlistments after Stonewall Jackson's great victory at Chancellorsville. Anyway, so that was his proposal, and I have thought about that since, you know, was he right? And Longstreet, he was told by Lee to write his memoirs. Please write your memoirs, please write your memoirs. I'm not sure why Lee was so persistent on that, but maybe it was with all his generals. And Longstreet finally got around to it later in life, but he greatly respected Lee and named a son after it. But he would never say anything about his disagreement on that. And when he did, after he had died, he became very unpopular in the South. But now, okay, in retrospect, because I was asked to go in my uniform, I kid you not, to Parris Island Marine Base. I knew the CO commanding colonel at the air base on the Marine Air Base on the north side of the county, and he called me and said, you know, General Clint would like you to come over and do it. And I said, yeah. And he says, oh, Tom, could you wear a uniform? All right, so I did, and yeah, and I show up in my uniform at the Marine Base, and they got the boot, the Marine newspapers taking photos, and the general salutes me because he's a brigadier, and I'm a lieutenant general. He salutes me. Oh, yeah. And then we go in. What it was, and I forget the acronym that the military uses, is when they studied past battles of the Revolution and the Civil War. And probably in Europe, they do the Bulge and Waterloo and all that as well. But this was part of a class that they were doing, and it was all these Marine officers and senior NCOs. They were also included. They had read the book. They had studied history books. The movie had been playing at the base theater at Parris Island, like for months. And they also had come up to Gettysburg and did the whole battlefield. So they knew about this, the tactics and the strategy. So when I went there, I gave my talk and whatnot, and then opened it up to questions and answers. And one guy asked me, he says, well, what about that? What do you think? And I said, well, in retrospect, had Longstreet and Lee disassembled the army into marching order, which means all the cannons are pulled out of the line, all the supply wagons, the ammunition, the food, etc., everything. The artillery is now hooked up to caissons, and horses are connected, and the infantry is now sideways with all their heavy gear on, marching towards Maryland down the Gettysburg Pike Road towards Maryland. They would have been sideways to the Union Army, which would have been right up there facing them. What a flank attack that would be. And that's probably what Lee was thinking. I'm stuck here. And if I have to retreat, the only way is straight back to Virginia, across the Potomac. I have to fight here, and we have to win. And I think he almost says that, but without going into all the tactics. But that's what ran through my mind. And I think they all bought that, because I said, consider, this is also period stuff, but it's like a whole army marching off like that, not ready to throw down into combat, while the enemy comes straight down at them.
How much of a history buff?
A giant flanking attack, I'm sorry.
How much of a history buff were you before you took control? How much about
Since I was age 7, as I said before, yes, yeah. And it's not just the Civil War. I mean, everybody thinks I'm like an expert on the Civil War, but there were times, I had a really great memory then. But, I would, sometimes I would go to Pat Fauci. Fauci, who was this? Oh yeah, right. English Civil War, I know a little bit. Surprised the Irish are surprised how much I know about the Irish Rebellion and the Irish Civil War. Mexicans were surprised about how much I knew about the Mexican Revolution, and of course, the Mexican-American War, which I also made a movie on. Spanish history, Italian history. Here's one for you. Abraham Lincoln in 1861, when Garibaldi had unified Italy and the Italian states, was offered command of the Federal Army by Lincoln. He needed a general, one that won battles, and that was Garibaldi. And Garibaldi, who was a huge hero at the end of this, not just in Italy, but also in Germany, because they're going, we need to unify like the Italians. And also in England, Queen Victoria invited him for a ticker tape parade. And he handed everything over, and this and that, now I'm retiring. But when he had the offer, he replied telegram, he said, thank you very much, it's an honor, I respect that. I'm not quite sure this would be a great idea. I don't know how good his English was. How would he command all those generals? I mean, that's a huge army. That's why all the Europeans were sending, as we see in our movie, Japanese, Germans, right? They're all French. They're all there, like, you know, with their military aid camps, and yes, yeah, and and the English too, and and they're there to say, my God, this is modern warfare. We need to go over and send our, colonels and whatnot over there to study this. It was the railroads, it was the telegrams, it was barbed wire, it was trench warfare, it was gigantic, well, they had big mortars before then, but it was ironclad ships, submarines, I said telegrams, and I don't know, and rifles that could be accurate at 1,000 yards. Yes?
Let's take another question.
Yeah.
I could ask if you gentlemen could reflect on 30 years of Gettysburg. The movie, my young teenage sons are watching the movie today. Talk about the impact this film has had worldwide.
I'm reminded of a quote, many memorable quotes by Edmund Burke in the last third of the 18th century. Something like this. Society is an open-ended partnership between the dead, the living, and the unborn. Once you absorb that thought, it influences everything you do. The act of making a historical film, in that moment, we're the living generation. But we're making it about a generation that's long gone. And we're making for, as I said earlier, a generation that's unborn. So the making of a historical film is exactly the description of what Edmund Burke talked a lot about long before cinema existed. In that time, there was literature, there was history, and written word. Once you accept this view, I think it's liberating, and it's a great solace, because life is no longer measured by the paltry number of years that we, as individuals, are on this earth, but it expands into the distant past, into the unknowable and distant future. And already this film, which was made 31 years ago, released 30 years ago, has now entered, I think it's fair to say, this timeless place across the generations. So when people see it, and people even unborn who will see this 20 and 30 years from now, thanks to the work of these actors and this crew and this community, we'll have a communion with the generation of the 1860s. Isn't that mystical? Isn't that magical? And so our task on day one was not only to get the costumes and the tactics and what you see right, but to get the soulfulness, the inner life of these people. I think that's why the film lives. Yes, we had to get the battle scenes right, of course we did, but it lives because it's a window into the moral universe, into the soulfulness of the generation that endured the cataclysm, the tragedy of the American Civil War.
Take another question. All right.
Hi, Rick Leisenring. I was a cast member of Confederate Voice. This is for Tom Berenger. I'm not going to get into the the deep end of the movie. My question is, how did you tolerate that beard all the filming time?
The beard didn't bother me that much. It was the uniform, hot wool uniforms. Yeah. I mean, you had to be real careful. You noticed that you noticed in the movie, but it wasn't uncommon for artillery to just pull off their wool tunics and strip down to, bare-chested or an undershirt, because they were pulling those cannons back, pushing them forward, then running back and forth to get the cannonballs, shoving them down. They just constantly acted like that. Pretty athletic guys in good shape, but if you had all that stuff on, you could just keel over in the heat. I don't know how many people we had went down. I mean, the first day, I think we had eight people, Confederates, go down with heat exhaustion, and the ambulances would come out and pick them up. Later on, there were bee stings, always heat exhaustion, bee stings, all kinds of stuff. Oh, geez, like 2 weeks ago, I met a doctor in Florida, and we got to talking, and he, really interesting guy, and then he says, we start talking and everything, and he goes, Gettysburg, he goes, I had a practice in Hanover, and he says, I ended up being one of the doctors for all those reenactors. I go, oh God, you remember? Yeah, the heat stroke and the bee stings and things. He says, oh, all kinds of stuff, yeah. Talk about serendipity. I mean, this was 2 weeks ago, and he was there. Yeah. But that, yeah, it's the uniforms, yeah.
Say one more thing. We're all here today and celebrating this wonderful weekend thanks to this museum, this Adams County Historical Society, the Journey Through Hallowed Ground, American Battlefield Trust, the Seminary Museum, and Main Street, Gettysburg. So on behalf of the cast and crew, let's give these wonderful people a hand.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust's YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.